everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to our third iteration of the Track 2 Dialogue on Iraq, sponsored by the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, the DT Institute, and the Atlantic Council. Our work began in March 2020 in Berlin, where experts addressed Iraq's political, socioeconomic, and security challenges. The result was a detailed diagnosis of conditions in Iraq so we could better understand how to improve public services, grow the economy, and improve security. To do so, the group recommended pursuing measures to improve civil service competence, mobilize the youth, a balanced decentralization of government services, implementing e-governance capabilities, and facilitating militia integration in a manner that strengthens and legitimizes Iraq's state institutions. In the second round, the group then took up how to achieve these objectives, which due to COVID took place virtually between August and December 2020. The result was a document that provided a roadmap that identified and prioritized measures that could realize the objectives articulated in the first round. It also refined those objectives so that the measures were actionable and the goals were achievable. But now that we had a map, we needed a way to move around. And that was the task of the third round, which offers specific steps the Iraqi government and its international, governmental, and non-governmental partners can take to mobilize the kinds of persons, activities, resources, and support to achieve the objectives and conditions called for in the first two rounds. What's interesting to us is the findings and recommendations are not only drawn from 2 years of engagement with the dialogue's community of experts, they also come from responses we gathered from Iraqi political, economic, business, and security leaders to surveys we conducted in mid-2021. So now to get this event started, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. Ambassador Ramon Blequois is a Spanish diplomat who's on his way to be the Consul General in Argentina, but his last assignment was Ambassador at Large for Mediation and Intercultural Dialogue in the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs until last February. He was also previously the EU Ambassador to Iraq from 2017 to 2019 and head of the political section of the EU delegation to Yemen. He held several postings in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the embassies of Spain and Ghana, Indonesia, Egypt, Guatemala, Iran, Argentina, and India. He has also held different positions in the ministry as head of the Office of the Director for Latin America in the Spanish Cooperation Agency, Chief Cabinet of the Director of the Cervantes Institute, and a Senior Advisor at the Policy Planning Department. So please, on this cheerful note, please welcome Ambassador Blequois.
Thank you, Anthony. It is really an honor to be the keynote speaker for this presentation of the report that is the result of 2 years of engagement of extremely knowledgeable international and Iraqi experts. And as you said, with the involvement of Iraqi political, economic, and social actors. This ambitious endeavor has a very special, I think, characteristic because the cooperation between the Atlantic Council, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and the DT Institute is actually the result of this true partnership between the United States, Europe, and Iraq. And I think it is really one of the few occasions in which this partnership is actually being carried out with an extremely full-heartedly joint effort. Because we talk a lot about it, but often there's more competition than actually partnership in this kind of initiatives. And the report presents, I think, very important findings and recommendations that, as you said, intend to assist the government of Iraq and the international community and its partners to really have an impact in improving the political, social, economic, and security conditions in the country. The second valuable element in this project and in this particular report, I think, is that it really pushes aside the neat theoretical models that most analytical efforts in the case of research concerning Iraq have shown, and really embraces this confusing complexity of the Iraqi reality. And I think in that sense, it's a true labor of love. because there is this effort to go beyond what is the structural, analytical points and really go into the challenges that Iraqis individually and as a group and as members of different political parties or factions face when they are really confronted with the challenges of achieving a common project, to really make progress in a collective endeavor. And that is because when any of these efforts of reform is presented, is generally to somebody's loss. There's always this tension between the conviction that I think many Iraqis have of the need to embrace and to engage in reform or in changes, and the cost that this has for their particular interests. Many of the initiatives that we had in the past, and I was personally engaged in many of them in my time when I was ambassador of the European Union to Iraq, in case of confronting corruption, achieving really political reform, or engaging into security sector transformation, has been actually hampered and in many cases failed because it has not taken into account these particular conditions. Now, I think this report comes also at a very timely moment. We are going through a new political cycle in Iraq, coming out of the recent elections, something that started before, I think with the past elections, but has really increased. I mean, there is an incremental process in which the old models, the famous Taif al-Muhassasa, has reached the end of the rope and is considered like not anymore as a useful tool. But at the same time, there is no clear alternative for or new roadmap for the future social contract and political framework in Iraq. And this is happening at a very convulsed international moment that to a large extent affects Iraq, sometimes in a positive way, sometimes in a negative one. I mean, you mentioned the impact of the COVID crisis that has been an international, a global challenge for every country. But now we have the Russian-Ukrainian conflict that has actually transformed, I think, the geopolitical parameters and is threatening to really have a very wide shockwave in many countries in the world for the increase in prices of energy, of raw materials, is having a particular impact in the Middle East. The question of the food imports and the cost of this for many countries threatens stability and social peace. At the same time, we should not forget that just recently, the China-Iran partnership agreement has really presented a new scenario in which, and that has to be connected with the Russian crisis and the current impact of this in the triangular relationships between Russia, China, and the West. All that is having an impact in Iraq. In the positive side, obviously, energy prices rise, offers Iraq breathing space for investing these windfall earnings to address some of the pressing social and economic challenges. Then, of course, the impact of new technologies in the overall geopolitical scene is going to have also a tremendous effect in the new power relations between countries. And Iraq doesn't seem to be very well prepared for what's coming. So this report has a very pragmatic, realistic, and I think extremely subtle approach that really offers Iraqis a very wide menu of concrete specific measures that can really inform different political programs. It's not something that has a predetermined political vision in mind. I think it's a menu from which most Iraqi political actors can actually take important elements to build their own proposals, and is very much inspired in this feedback from Iraqi experts. I remember that we had in the Berlin session extremely important discussions and some proposals that came into that first meeting then actually have not only informed the spirit and the results of the report, but also government action to some extent, especially in the White Book for Economic Reform and some other initiatives. So I also want to underline that the fact that this report challenges the established or the common wisdom concerning Iraq as a country that is mired by problems, by troubles, but that has deeply flawed governance issues, that is sort of locked into impossible dilemmas, and is the turf of regional struggle for influence between Iran on one hand and the US or its regional allies on the other. I think the fact that this report comes from the understanding and the conviction that Iraq has made extraordinary progress towards democracy since 2003, and that is one of the few countries in the Middle East to hold really international recognized elections, and the fact that there's peaceful transfers of power. And we should not forget that even if Iraq had in the past 3 years gone through extremely troubled political situation, very limited violence has taken place. Of course, the repression of the Tashrin movement has been dramatic and had a tremendous impact in not only in Iraq, but also in the international public opinion. But we should not forget that even in a country that is considered to be peaceful and stable like Egypt, in one day, there were many more killings and deaths than in the whole process that happened in Iraq. So Iraq, despite this sort of reputation of being a country prone to violence and instability, actually has proven the opposite. And the fact that consensus building and negotiations to achieve or to arrive to reach government formation is extremely ingrained in the Iraqi political culture, offers, I think, extremely important elements on which to build for the future. And I think that is the whole idea of this report, and the effort that all those that participated in these 2 years have very much in mind. So it's true that Iraq suffers from high unemployment, widespread corruption, poor education, security challenges, and multiplicity of non-state actors interfering in the process. regional actors as well interfering in the whole process. But so far, the successive Iraqi governments, no matter what the inclination or approach has been, have maintained a consistency in terms of becoming a bridge for regional understanding and trying to avoid taking sides in regional struggles. And recently we had this conference in Baghdad that, despite whatever we may consider that it is not necessarily changing dramatically the regional scene, it does prove that Iraq has played an extremely constructive role, that Iraq has been a channel for exchanging messages, reaching dialogue among regional opponents. I have to be, I think, extremely concise, because we are reaching the end of this presentation, and there's so many things I would like to say, but we have a fantastic panel that will elaborate on many of these points. But I want to again emphasize, in my 30 years of experience in the Middle East, Iraq has probably been one of the most exciting and stimulating experiences, because its complexity, the multi-layered nature of its cultural and political identities are unique in the region and are certainly a source of extraordinary resilience. When I arrived in 2017, it was still the aftermath and the end of the conflict, the war against Daesh. Then there was the challenge of the Kurdish referendum of independence, and there's been going through many different crises, and still the resilience of the Iraqi state, the determination of the Iraqi people to achieve a better future for themselves, to reach political agreements and solutions that will avoid plunging the country again throughout in the kind of turmoil it has been involved, is, I think, extreme. It is remarkable, and it should be appreciated and encouraged. This, I think, this report is not only useful for the Iraqi actors, as I said, but also for the international community to understand that our role has to be through the realities of the Iraqi political, economic, and social actors and structures. And there is enough space in those realities to really bring in some fundamental change and some meaningful achievements. So I have learned a lot throughout these 2 years of exchanges and discussions with extremely brilliant experts. And I think these contributions will also be useful for the many of us who think that the future of Iraq is not just something that concerns Iraqis, but is something that is key for the stability and security of the region and for our own security. So I will let it there, and I'm sure that many more interesting questions will come up. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Blackwell, and for this presentation. You come to us with great experience from participating in the sessions of this dialogue from the outset. Also, the discussions that we had on the side We meet a lot and we speak a lot. Also from your experience that you just alluded to in the Middle East and in Iraq. Let me ask you a quick follow-up question. As someone who served in Iraq as the ambassador of the European Union, also I can attest to the fact that you are one of the most mingling ambassadors, if I were to put it that way, with Iraqis. You took particular interest in their aspirations and their heartaches and headaches, and you spoke with the Iraqis, not just the politicians, but every time I go to Baghdad and we speak, you really go to the Iraqis themselves, who are not just who are in a political position, in an official capacity, but also to the average Iraqis, if I could put it that way. Let me ask you from your own experience as the ambassador of the European Union, where do you think the Iraqi successes and possibly setbacks in their relations with the European Union, and how can they be informed by this report to perform better on that level, especially that the European Union is an extremely important partner of Iraq, not just on security or military aspects, but also economic, cultural, educational, etc. All of the sectors really that Iraq needs cooperation and needs help.
Well, I have to say that I believe the European Union was and is a partner of choice for Iraq, and I think that there were a lot of expectations at the time. We actually presented a series of instruments to really move forward in this relationship. The Partnership and Cooperation Agreement, the results of the Kuwait Conference, the new European EU strategy for Iraq, and with an extraordinary level of consensus among all member states. We had, I think, a very promising roadmap, but we had the unfortunate circumstances of the crisis, the political crisis that started later in October. I left in September, and October, November, then the whole political crisis and the protests erupted, and that was certainly a setback. I think Iraqis then became too much entangled in their own internal conflicts to take full advantage of the opportunities that these instruments and the interest of the European Union had. And then the European Union maybe was too cautious to really jump in and try to really play a more determined role in the context of that crisis. So I think we lived through a year in which pretty much everything was put on hold. Then the COVID crisis hit. So we had basically a couple of years in which things have been put on hold, but I think the fundamentals remain. And I think both Iraq and the European Union need to take again that thread and build on these opportunities, because economic diversification, the green transition, the whole response to the current international crisis is something that can be done from that perspective. This report, I think, as I said, offers a very wide menu that can be tailor-made for Iraqi needs in terms of the rhythm and the expansion and the reach of these measures. So I think both for the European Union and for Iraq, this is an extremely useful paper, and it has the added advantage that it provides this US connection, in which sometimes I think it's a false dilemma when it's seen that the European-Iraqi relationship has to come at the expense of the Iraqi-US relationship. I think they're extremely complementary, and they can do different things that are very well integrated, I think, in this particular report. So the report, I think, addresses this unnecessary dilemma between the Iraqis have to choose, because obviously Iraq has proven also that it's skillful at the question of choices. Iraqis have these multiple identities, and that allows them also to somehow harmonize these multiple loyalties that Iraq needs to develop, because Iraq cannot get into binary choices when it comes either to regional partners or to its international partners. And we, as international partners, have to also accept this multiplicity. We cannot claim exclusive rights to Iraqi love and loyalties, because that will be completely unrealistic. And it will put Iraqis in a position that will be impossible. So I think we need to accept that reality. And I think this report is built on that particular, as I said at the beginning, embracing of the complexity of Iraq and accepting that there's not a quick fix or a simple choice.
In a minute or so, I have a question from Mr. Hussein Al-Chalabi. He says, can you, Ambassador, elaborate on there is no clear alternative to muhassasa?
Yes, I think, as I said, muhassasa has reached the end of its rope. And it's obviously that it's not a system that allows Iraqi institutions to build that legitimacy. That is the first chapter of this paper. But there's not a clear-cut alternative, because, as I said, and I think the report very clearly reflects, any change in the Iraqi political system will come at the expense of one of the stakeholders. And the balance in that system has been built precisely by keeping everybody inside that big tent. At the same time, that paralyzes political action, because you cannot take any course of action that eventually alienates one of the key partners in that big group. So there's no clear alternative, but there is a need to find one. And you can only build a real, credible, and realistic alternative by understanding the interest of the different groups. You cannot just ostracize one and say all the problems. Some analysts have this particular mantra that if we eliminate the Hashid, then everything will be fine. But the Hashid is not the problem. It's a symptom. It's the symptom of the dysfunctional nature of the Iraqi system that forces Iraqis to find alternative channels to which access services, political influence, or to get economic advantages. So the first thing is we need to understand, not we know, but we need to understand and accept that you need to work from that situation in which government so far, and I think the fact that government formation has been paralyzed until now is because building a majority government and keeping significant actors outside is not yet feasible or not possible. And how you can find incentives that make at least the key players bring or come into a new political arrangement. It's certainly a difficult thing to do, but I think that is the challenge we have. And I think that is something that this paper offers some avenues to address.
Thank you, Ambassador. We appreciate this candid discussion and also very insightful experience-based discussion that we can only expect from you. Thank you very much. And now we turn to our panel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are fortunate to have an excellent panel with us today to elaborate on these points and also on the other questions regarding the report, its content, and what it can present as a potential and as an opportunity. With us, Ambassador Rand Al-Rahim. She is the co-founder and president of the Iraq Foundation. She is also a member of our advisory committee. Thank you, Ambassador, for your support for the past years to the Iraq Initiative. With us also, Dr. Maria Fantapi. She is a special advisor for MENA at the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue in Geneva. Dr. Laith Kubwa, who is an independent advisor, but he has served in many roles in Iraq, and also was one of the key figures in the Iraqi opposition to the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein, and he spent much effort in his, much of his life was put for the sake of bringing democracy and more decent life for the Iraqis. Also, Dr. Ina Rudolph, she is a senior research fellow at the International Center for the Study of Radicalization. I am moderating this. I am Abbas Kadhim, the director of the Iraq Initiative at the Atlantic Council. Welcome to the panel, and every one of you really needs no introduction for watchers of Iraq, so we did not elaborate on your CVs. Let me ask a question for all the panel, and maybe starting with Dr. Laith. This report took 2.5 years of time from some of the most distinguished experts on Iraq, Americans, Europeans, and Iraqis as well. It took more than 3 years since its inception at the Iraq Initiative, and it was written by very capable authors. How would the recommendations of this report, and also the importance of this report, as Ambassador Blakwa just mentioned, and you said in just off the air about it, how can the recommendations and the report in general find their way to the political, economic, security, social realities in Iraq, and be beneficial for the Iraqi decision maker and for those it is intended to help?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and congratulations on this excellent report. And it actually really provides a roadmap, and it is of great value for those in Iraq who really are concerned and are willing to change. It really provides a great entry point. I think what one needs to focus on is the reality on what scope for implementing it, how to advance it. These are the real challenges. And the first challenge I think one would face is that there is such a delicate power balance. I think Ambassador Blakwa was mentioning it. There is such a delicate power balance in the country that whatever reforms you want to do are acceptable and encouraged so long as they do not touch the reality, the power balance that exists in Iraq, which is a complex network of interests, connections that are fundamentally problematic. And I think they'll undermine any real attempt to implement that report. One key point is, I think in the year 2018, 2019, I was in Iraq, and it was obvious any serious attempt to implement any reform hits that reality. And the only way to advance with it is to get those stakeholders, those powers, and they have to not only be pressurized as the protest movement had pressurized them to make some changes. But they have to realize there is a cost for reform, and that the status quo of the system, maintaining things as they are just no longer an option. I think that would force what I would call عقد سلطة, a contract between the stakeholders. As painful as it might be, compromises must be made. Otherwise, internal pressure and external pressure will escalate and force these changes. The second challenge is more structural. As these recommendations reach Iraq, I can just envisage you have a prime minister at the prime minister office who can deal with it. You have the council of ministers who can deal with it. You have a body of advisors. You have the ministry of planning. So you have multiple bodies that are really not that integrated, and many, many excellent recommendations go into this into these mired of institutions, and they get so diluted. But that is secondary. I think unless there is a political will, a real political will, an agreement between the stakeholder, and costly, painful payment that must be accepted, I don't think recommendations would become effective. Those players, actors, will find a way around them.
Thank you. Let me, before I turn to the next speaker, just to mention that the audience is welcome to type their questions to the question and answer section of your Zoom screen. It will be more than welcome. Also, this event is on the record, so you are welcome to tweet or use this information. It's open discussion. So let me then move to Ambassador Randa Rahim. Same question.
Sorry.
And you are muted.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Abbas. Let me first commend the authors of the report for producing a very valuable document, which I think, if one can carry it over into Iraq and implement at least some of it, it will have an important impact. I want to pick up from where Dr. Leif Kubba was speaking and ended. And that is the question of creating political will. The problem we always have had, and there have been many recommendations and so on, is that the political class does not necessarily have the will for reform. And this is either because they simply can't think about reform and it is alien to their thinking, or much more likely, it is because any type of reform is apt to diminish their own interests, their own power, their own effort to capture as much of the state as they want. So how does one shift their thinking away from this very narrow personal gain and interest that impedes the adoption of reforms to a much broader outlook, which does not deny their interests, but also shows them that their interests are not in contradiction, but actually coincide or can coincide with the implementation of reforms. One really has to do a lot of work in order to persuade the political elite that they can gain if these reforms are implemented. And I think that is the biggest challenge. But one of the things I do want to suggest is that the international community does have a role to play in this. And it's, of course, there is pressure internally, as we saw in the protests of 2019, which have continued, by the way. The protests are not as dramatic, but they have continued in many provinces, particularly the southern provinces. But I think the international community does have a role, because this document is not only addressed to the Iraqi state, it in a way also addresses international actors. And I think if international actors can take this document, adopt some or all of its recommendations, and use those recommendations as a vehicle for approaching the Iraqi state, the Iraqi government, Iraqi parliament, Iraqi ministries, and that these recommendations become the recommendations of those international actors for a much wider engagement with the Iraqi body politic, then I think we have a chance of shifting the perspective of the Iraqi political elite. And I want to add here that one of the advantages we have in creating that shift is increasingly in the past few years, we have seen Iraqi politicians more eager to be accepted as members of the international community in good standing. So there is an interest, and I won't say, from 100% of the political groups that exist in Iraq, but a substantial body of political agents, political actors in Iraq really do want to integrate Iraq and themselves, of course, into the international community as members worthy of respect and acceptance. And I think this kind of need is something that the international community can play upon in its advocacy for the recommendations mentioned in this report. So this is a sort of a chink that we can sort of widen and exploit. Because really, ultimately, unless one can persuade political parties, members of parliament, ministers, and so on, and the council, and all those that Laith mentioned, unless we can persuade them that it's not only good for Iraq, but it's good for them as well, then there's no way of going forward.
Thank you, Ambassador. These are very valuable remarks and recommendations, and I would like to also mention that the Iraqi Initiative, from the outset, as you know, you are with us, not just participant in this, but also a member of the Iraqi Initiative family. We, from the very beginning, made it a philosophy to work always with the Iraqis, with the Iraqi government as partners. We never think and recommend on behalf of the Iraqis, because this is their life and this is their decision, and it is more of an Iraq-centric work that we do, as much as it is international-centric. And also, we are having a plan this year to take the report and go and take a few members of the dialogue to also present it to the Iraqi government and hold discussions in Baghdad now that the situation is better on that. And certainly it is important to do this. Let me turn to Dr. Maria Fantapi about her remarks on the same question, if she likes to elaborate.
Thank you, Abbas, and thank you also for involving me into the cycles of dialogue. I found it very enriching, and as it has been mentioned, a series of recommendations are really valuable. It's very rare to find a report which has so many practical takeaways, so again, congratulations for this very great achievement. I wanted to draw the attention on what Ambassador Rand in part has said, but also what Dr. Laith has said. On one side, on what actually the international community in this specific geopolitical time can do, and on the other side, what the domestic Iraqi leadership can do in order to make really this recommendation moving forward and become somehow reality. I think that the international community has a role to play because I think that Iraq is really the mirror of regional tensions. Whenever there is regional polarizations, those regional polarizations are reflected, unfortunately, in Iraq. We have seen this through different phases since 2003. And I would say that it's commendable that Iraqi leaderships have tried to mediate or like convene meetings to sort of attenuate those tensions, but the capacity at the level of the central government is still very weak. Iraqi government can play a role of convener, of passing messages, but really it's unfortunately most of the time actually the victim of those tensions rather than actually succeeding in attenuating it. And so here comes the role of the international community. I do think that both the United States and Europe, especially in this time where one would think that all attention should focus on other conflict like in Ukraine, they should still keep an eye on how important it is to keep the region into this de-escalation mode, because the risk for polarization is always there. We see that now there is a political stalemate in Iraq. The political stalemate, it's not just the result of domestic division, but also mirrors tensions between Iran on the one hand and some Gulf countries on the others, and Turkey, so who are supportive of a majority government against the Iranians, who of course are instead benefiting from this stalemate. So, and whenever there is stalemate in Iraq, whenever you don't have a government that is formed, nothing can be done. The most urgent, pressing problem, starting from youth, climate, they are just falling into a non-priority, because the priority is to try to actually form the government. So once again, I do think that the international actors, both US and the EU, should really keep engaged in trying to understand how and in which way to avoid regional polarization to emerge on the one hand, and also keep an eye on how really Iraq can still be a conducive conveners of those meetings. We have seen the Baghdad summit, we have seen the Iran-Saudi dialogue, because these are beneficial both for the Iraq domestic stability and also for the regional de-escalation as a whole. So this is the point for the international community. And then the second point relates to the Iraqi leadership. There has been a very good elaboration on the problems that are internal to the Iraqi political system and the body politics really of Iraq. I think that we often only blame the leaders of this political class, which are responsible for this muhassasa system, at least as they are represented. But I'm always also very attentive to understand that also there is a real problem in a muhassasa of the institutions themselves, of the civil servants who are part of those institutions, who in some way they are either forced or accustomed to tolerate this muhassasa system, and they perpetuate it. And this actually brings those results that Dr. Late was mentioning, this multiplication of institution and bureaucracy that actually is not ready and responsive to effective recommendations. So it's very important to understand actually how a new generation of civil servants who are driven by and motivated by change, and who are actually seeing the pressing challenge that Iraq faces. How do we connect it with the reformist-driven leaders, and how can we, within this framework, actually bring forward the change within institutions? This, as the Ambassador Rand said, will be beneficial not only for Iraq but also for the legitimacy of the Iraqi leaders themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. Just before I go to Ina, there is a question that I would like to clear up here. Matt Zeiss says, what was the role, the KRG's role in this report, and will you be presenting it to them as well? As you know, Matt, this is a track 2 dialogue work. Such, it will not involve people in government, not in Baghdad, not in Erbil. This as the writing of the report and the discussion. In fact, we had people who are in Iraqi government, 2 very important figures. Dr. Ali Allawi was the keynote presenter in our Berlin talk, and when he took a job in the government of Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi, he went out of the group. Same thing with Dr. Hassan Nadhim, who became Minister of Culture and the Speaker of the spokesperson of the government. There were also people in the government in the United States. As a matter of fact, Ramon himself took also a job with the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I would say that this dialogue has been good for the participant in a way, and also good for us to know that we have included some of the best Iraqis, some of the best Europeans and some of the best Americans among the community that works on Iraq. But also we will talk to the KRG, just like we will talk to Baghdad about it. The KRG, for as far as we are concerned, are Iraqis, and they are no less Iraqis and no more Iraqis than the rest. Now, Ina, please.
Thank you very much for having me. And I must say, I quite agree with the cautious optimism by Ambassador Rand. What I found particularly refreshing in the whole dialogue process was the holistic approach of thinking about the issues of mutual concern and also addressing elephants in the room, be that the Hashd file or the presence of non-state group, from all angles. And as the ambassador implied, in the Iraqi context, carrots often work better than sticks. And no strategies towards stabilization, no matter how well-intentioned they are or sort of like well-communicated, have any chance without buy-in from local decision makers and without political will. So as I worked like mostly on the security sector recommendations, I would like to address a couple of my personal takings. I remember in the beginning how openly we discussed the some of the undesirable side effects of targeted assassination campaigns, such as the elimination of General Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis. And I think also, as Ramon mentioned, we could easily reach a consensus that targeted, especially like foreign-sponsored assassinations do not really work. They have a big risk of backfiring, and where we focused our efforts and our recommendations, as you can see in the report, is on identifying multiple ways to render the presence of non-state or parastate actors redundant in the first place. So unfortunately, even empirical research demonstrates that in addition to ideological support by some of their grassroots bases, those groups have managed to establish themselves as powerful brokers on the ground, even in areas where residents do not by any means subscribe to their ideology. So in terms also of the economic conditions, depending on the access to patronage networks by those civilians, they would often even resort to non-state or parastate actors to resolve their issues. And this applies specifically in a context like with limited presence of the public administration. Therefore, the way to go for a lot of participants was to find ways to improve the governance performance of state institutions and to work with Iraqi officials to help those sort of restore their legitimacy as welfare and also as security providers in the eyes of conflict-affected communities. Now, I don't want to sound also too naive, because I must say throughout all of the discussions, we were quite aware of the multiple challenges of reining in those different sets of actors. And we have sort of an oligopoly on violence in the Iraqi context, unfortunately. As Ramon, for example, mentioned in the beginning, a lot of those Hashid-affiliated networks do not necessarily draw their influence directly from the paramilitary agency, but from their leverage in official security agencies or other bureaucratic branches of the state. So one of, I would say, like most enlightening recommendations towards the international community from my perspective was to focus its efforts on building strong institutions around a national Iraq-first organizational culture, rather than externally targeting individuals as villains, or, as in case of some other politicians, overtasking them as potential saviors and answers like to all issues of concerns. So those are just a couple of comments, and maybe throughout the discussion, I would be happy to go into more detail.
Thank you very much, Ina. Let me also, I just got saying that to the previous question, it might also be worth mentioning that we did have a former member of Kurdish parliament who was a Kurd in the dialogue. Also, we had another Kurd who is also a fellow at the Atlantic Council, attended the sessions of the dialogue. Just to clear on that, it's just we don't have officials who are in current government capacity in Baghdad or in Erbil. Let me ask a question to Dr. Laith, and this also coming from the audience. I think it's worth exploring at this point. It says the report recommends including tribal and religious leaders in the forming of a presidential commission, as well as engaging with religious and ethnic minorities to build trust. What role do you see for religious leaders in taking forward these recommendations or pushing for reconciliation in Iraq generally? And how does this intersect with other efforts to include other actors that some religious interpretations may seek to exclude, such as women and youth? So again, not necessarily I adopt the question, but I'm just sending it to you in the way it was written.
Well, thank you very much. Maybe this gives me the opportunity to comment a little bit broader beyond the question, but I think the question is valid. I think we need to look at the deterioration that took place in Iraq over the last 20 years, in particular, although it started prior to 2003, but in particular post-2003. And yes, the weakness of the state meant the emergence of sub-identities, local leaders, at very much the cost of the state ability to deliver services or the failure of the state. All these have emerged. And this, regrettably, was coupled with a zero-sum game between political actors who found interest in pushing further those sub-identities. They've built their power bases and sectarian and ethnic identities. And the outcome of that was weakening the fabric of society and weakening the state. So I think in the report where you've identified reviving the unity of the state and the Iraqi identity is critical. And I'd like to comment about what the report had, not about what the report has recommended, but maybe on what has not been said, which is important. So the question of religion and state is critical. And I think Iraq has tried in the last 20 years seeing powers outside the state, but because of their religious strata and influence, have more influence over the state than even political parties. And more dangerously, religious powers who are outside Iraq having influence on players and actors inside Iraq. This cannot be sustained in the long term. And it's a sign of a weakness of a state rather than a healthy sign of any religious loyalty or practice, because there are 200 states in the world, and the issue of religion and state is clearly defined. And I don't think there is room of having multiple local leaders, be it religious or tribal, having powers above the state. It just doesn't work in the 21st century. So that's one element. But I think the second important element, maybe that was not spelled out in the recommendations about Iraq's unity and identity, is the one to do with the Arab Kurdish identity of Iraq. Now, it's the Kurds overwhelmingly voted for independence, and circumstances do not allow it. But I think that paves the road that the status quo is problematic. Going back to the past is not an option. This issue has been going on for so long. The best way to resolve it, and I think it was raised by, if I'm not mistaken, at Chatham House by Masroor Barzani. It was raised before that. But the idea of resolving this issue of identity by a confederal Arab Kurdish state, and one can think of Kirkuk as the shared capital, like the system in Canada. So that will resolve many issues, but it will feel the Kurds comfortable with an Iraqi identity within a confederal state. And it also resolved the issue of Shia Sunnis because they're predominantly Arabs, and that issue should be resolved. A third issue to do with unity is everybody in Iraq, whatever their ethnic or religious origin is, they have deep roots in the land of Iraq, going back to 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, starting from the Assyrians and the Chaldeans, going throughout all the communities that existed in Iraq and Baghdad, when Baghdad was the capital of the Abbasi Empire at that time. So Abbasi state. So it was, everybody has deep roots in Iraq, but it seems they have problems with the state of Iraq. And this is the real challenge, where the state must remain above everybody. It should be the pride. Iraq should be the pride. And one last point, I think that was not maybe fully spelled out, although it was partially mentioned, is to do with the wounds, the open wounds, pre-2003 and post-2003. Now, the revival of Iraq's identity, you have to ask the question, who are the beneficiaries of reviving that identity and who are the losers? And obviously, those who will lose out of reviving Iraq's identity will oppose it. And that is the reason we need advocates, we need awareness where people can push for Iraq's identity. And as I said, we need something more radical to resolve the issue of the Kurds being comfortable, fully comfortable within the state of Iraq.
This answer dovetails with a question from Ambassador Faisal Esterabadi. And thank you for all your support, Ambassador Esterabadi. You are also a member of our advisory committee from the very beginning. You also are a participant in the dialogue, and we always refer to your wisdom and your help on many hard questions. So Ambassador Esterabadi is waiting for the speakers to identify, and this may be, I will take it to Maria first, to identify a realistic self-interest perceived by political actors within Iraq, compelling them to engage in the recommended reforms. None of the actors, Ambassador Esterabadi says, whether in Baghdad or in Erbil, perceive, for instance, strengthening the government institutions and national identity, two things just Dr. Laith mentioned, as being in their narrow political interest. In the meantime, the Iraqi electorate is disengaging from the political process as demonstrated by diminishing voter turnout rates. So What are those interests? Are there any? And I will also open some of these aspects of the question to other panelists, but let me start with Maria.
Thank you, Ambassador, and for the very important question you raise. And I think really the way you worded it, it's the right way to do, because one way in which these recommendations can really go through the political system is by identifying the opportunities in which they can converge with actually the interest of some of the Iraqi political players. And I think that there is in this, I think, an aspect which is that there are some of the reform process that can be converging with the self-interest of politicians in order to remain in power. Simply, we have seen that I think that, for example, in the Kurdistan region, the Kurdistan regional government has actually implemented, to a certain extent, some reforms, especially in the everything that relates to e-governance, for example. I just mentioned this, but then this is at the expenses of all another part of the reform, sometimes also at the expense of the internal democratic process, which is the most important, actually. So I think that sometimes you have some of the reforms that can be converging with the interest of the political leaders, but that they are selectively identified and carried on, and sometimes they even backfire actually on the performance of the democratic performance of the political system. However, we don't have to think, and this is my hopeful remark, that all politicians are just driven by self-interest alone. I do think that there is also a hopeful bunch of people who actually, especially after the demonstration happened, and especially after the pressure from the street open in front of them some of the most pressing problems, that they are looking at also how to have more principled policies. The problem is that, and this is what I have experienced myself also, that even when you have people who are committed to actually implement important reform, let me take, for example, the issue of climate. I have followed recently how the process of Iraq adhering to the Paris Agreement, participation to the COP26, having passed the Green Mesopotamia initiative that start to tackle some of the problems. And you see that this is, in theory, something that would be beneficial for everyone, but still, you have some politicians who understand the value of this, including, for example, the current Minister of Economy and of Finance, Ali Alawi, including the President and others. But also, it's so difficult to actually work through that very difficult institutional system that Dr. Leith was mentioning at the very beginning. So even something which is principle driven and useful for everyone can become very complex. But still, the good news is that Iraq finally has passed and approved a Mesopotamia initiative. So it means that sometime actually and of course, this is also in the interest of those who have worked for it, but I still do believe that is also in the interest of the country. So I think that we need to keep the cautious optimism on what can be achieved, but still, I do think that there is some elements of the political class who are actually sensible to the reforms progress in reforms, and also that there are perhaps also new pressures from the societies that even more encourage these politicians to take these routes. My hope will be that also new faces will come into the political system, younger people, who actually can, even more, advance these ideas. But as we see with the elections, this is easy said, but not easy done. Thank you.
Thank you. Ina or any other member of the panel would like to quickly talk about this as well?
Yes, absolutely. Ambassador Rand, I think you were before me.
Sorry, Ina, go ahead. I'll listen to you first.
I was going by who spoke in the order, but definitely we are all.
Go ahead, Ina.
So yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. No, I just wanted to second Maria's remarks, and instead of starting with like very difficult files to digest, one should first identify more positive pockets of engagement. Now, cooperation on climate change is one thing. Another would be the salvation of Iraq's cultural heritage. And I think this is a quite fertile topic where one could bring different stakeholders and initiate a discussion that would sort of facilitate a more sustainable dialogue on who gets to determine Iraq's identity. So, for example, why should just a Sunni resident of Mosul take pride in certain cultural landmarks? And from what I've heard, from my most recent research, there are currently excellent exchange programs between the University of Mosul and University of Basra, where people from the south are actually coming to Mosul and also developing sort of an Iraqi national pride, with this cultural heritage that's not necessarily directly connected to their sect or to their ethnic identity. And I think such initiatives may be a bit small scale, but are the way to go for the future.
Ambassador.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me? Am I unmuted? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think what both Maria and Ina are speaking of are reforms that are interest neutral. In other words, they are desirable and desired by everyone and will not undermine the interest of anyone. So it's a win-win, it's good for everybody, and everybody can adopt them. And I think that's what you were saying, Ina, is true, that this is a good way to start because you build up a momentum of cooperation, collaboration, and so on, and then move on to the more difficult things. But I also want to ask the question, do we know, have we disaggregated the interests of these political leaders, political actors? And I think it would be helpful in order to know what is achievable, when, who can adopt what, to disentangle, to identify the different interests. We say they're self-interested. Well, what does that mean? Is it money? Is it power? Is it prestige? The parties are interested. Again, what is their specific interest? Is it regional? And I think a disaggregation of interests will actually be helpful, not only in advocating for some reforms, but in adopting strategies for advocating reforms and for pushing people off, whatever the baseball term is, center base or home base, into a direction of adopting some reforms. So I think that is an important approach that people who want to advocate these reforms to take, to identify what is the interest that they're going to lose, what is the negative impact on their interest. Conversely, is there a positive impact on their interest? That's all. Thank you.
Dr. Laith, would you like to talk about this, or you get an undisclosed question from Ambassador David Mack that I will tell you after you choose?
Well, if I just very quickly comment on Rand's, I think, insight, which is excellent, if I may.
Sure.
I think what we learned from Iraq and from other countries is when it comes to hard interest, nobody is going to sacrifice their self-interest unless they had to. And I think what happened in the protest and it just forced the government in Iraq, and it led to to changing the election law. Now, I do believe that ideally change should come within, but pressure is needed. The beauty of the recommendations and advancing them is that when the pressure increases, there ought to be an exit, a roadmap. So everybody should know you don't have to fight. There is actually an exit for you if the pressure increases. But I am not an optimist when it comes to those who are holding power in Iraq. I do believe they have to be forced out of their interest, but we can make that less painful and more accessible by advancing recommendations and starting to work on what is easier done than and postpone the harder ones. So this is, I think it's important to be said on how to advance these recommendations. I hope I can still get Ambassador Max a question.
You will get that too.
Right.
Yeah, and I know you didn't mean to dodge it. So Ambassador Max says Iraq has long borders with three powerful regional states: Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. Ever since Iraq achieved its independence, those three states, as well as global powers ranging from governments in Western European capitals to Moscow to Washington, have been tempted to interfere in Iraqi political life. To what extent can Iraq's embrace of internal reform help it to fend off external interference?
If I may, I think to Iraq it's existential. Everything we talked about, Iraq's identity and unity and rebuilding its economy in a neighborhood where everybody is progressing rapidly and in a neighborhood which is tough and full of challenges. Iraq, that used to be a balancing stone in the region, critical to the stability of the region, today is so weak, it can be a cause of instability. So reviving Iraq is actually critical to the stability of the region. There was an idea I think we all dreamt about and talked about, which is a broader like market in the Middle East where Turkey, Iran, the Gulf can integrate their economies and prosper. That cannot happen unless there is a revived Iraq. Currently, Iraq can be a cause of problems to the region because it will invite them to compete over a weak country. And unless Iraq revives itself, I think it can become a cause of instability in the region. Of course, the biggest challenge Iraq has, no question about it, is Iran excessive influence in Iraq. There is a legitimate influence and there is excessive influence. Iran has currently excessive influence in Iraq, but I think that is being addressed now, although painfully.
I would be remiss if I don't seek Ambassador Rahim's take on this, given her experience in international relations and diplomacy.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Abbas, and hello, David. Good to know you're there. Okay, Iraq's problem is not only that it is flanked by three powerful, confident neighbors. It's also that Iraq has all the fault lines of the region. So Iraq has a Kurdish fault line because it has a large Kurdish community, and for Turkey, that is a problem. Iraq is majority Shia, and for Iran, that may be an opportunity. It's a majority Arab country, and that is, of course, ties it to Saudi Arabia and Jordan. So there are a lot of regional fault lines, Turkey, the Kurds, Iran, the Shia, Saudis, the Sunnis, and Arabism, and so on. And this opens Iraq to a lot of interference and to attempts at destabilization by neighbors. It leads to military interference, as we have seen in Turkey. And even the Iranians have interfered militarily. But in here, I don't want to be extremely over-optimistic or naive. I see the fault lines also as an opportunity for Iraq. In other words, Iraq becomes the fulcrum for these contending forces, identities, powers, and so on. And I think Dr. Laith or somebody, in fact, we've been using the word balancing acts. Okay. So Iraq can potentially become the balancing element in the region. And rather than being the terrain for conflict, for interference, and so on, it can perhaps be the venue for some resolution, some détente, diffusion of tensions. And I don't think I'm being over-optimistic, because what we have seen is Iraq becoming a convener for two of most hostile, if you want, antagonistic powers, Iran and Saudi Arabia. And we can't yet say that Iraq is the mediator in their differences, but at least it has provided a venue and become a convener. And that in itself is a large step forward for Iraq to take. And if in the future it is possible, then the same kind of role can be carried out in other regional sort of hotspots, or hot topics rather. Now, but for Iraq to be able to do that, the state of Iraq has to be much stronger, has to have institutions that are functional and confident. I call them not just stronger, but confident institutions. And it has to maintain this kind of balance that it has begun in the last 2 or 3 years to build among all these contending forces in the region. So I'm really talking about a potential that these fault lines that are a problem can potentially be turned into an advantage for Iraq and for the region. But obviously we're not there yet, and some things need to take place inside the state for it to be actualized. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me ask a question that we really need to address, since it came up a couple of times in our discussion, which is the question of the Iraqi youth. And the discussions we had from the beginning until we ended up writing the report. The report itself also focuses a lot on the Iraqi youth, their role. Certainly this has become even more obvious with the youth agency and the changes that happened since October 2019. And the youth have had an important role in the pressure applied on the government that led to some changes, but also there is more to be said about their role and whether or not it has been realized or optimized. And anyone in the panel, and I will start with Maria. Normally I go with whoever spoke last or earliest. Maria and Ina, how do you view this question? Where are the Iraqi youth going, and how is the Iraqi government going to include the youth, and especially keeping in mind the recommendations of the report and the discussions that we had along the way?
Thank you, Abbas, Dr. Abbas. And I think I would a little bit challenge the concept of youth as such, because even in my own writings and reporting, you know, when I was doing field work in Iraq just before the Shireen movement happened, to my surprise, I realized that, young people are, there is a generational factor, which is the dissatisfaction vis-a-vis of the way in which Iraq has been governed since 2003. But this dissatisfaction actually mobilizes the youth in different directions. Youth can go to the Hashd al-Shabi, youth can go to Daesh, youth can go, but they can also go to protest, or they can be simply civil servants who reproduce the system of the muhassasa and accept this ethnic sectarian quota. So they can be at the same time a very strong driving force for change in a moment in which they bring also new political values. But they can also be an extremely challenging factor when they actually mobilize in armed group, or when they perpetrate the system of ethnic and sectarian quota. So I do think that when we speak about youth, we need to also define it in the way in which we are talking about young people who actually want to see different institutions. And as I said in my first remark, I do see a lot of potential in young people working in the private, aspiring to work in the private sector, or people who actually are now civil servants, but they do not want to be civil servants like their brothers, elder brothers, or their fathers. They want to really work in a different way, with innovative ideas, with more speed. Is not just about going to work at 8 and finishing the dawam at 2 and going back to the house and doing not much, but is really seeing that you are doing something. I want to mention the young person I had interviewed back in 2018, who actually was working, I think, for the Ministry of Irrigation, and he was very frustrated because he didn't. He was seeing how difficult the water issue was, but he wasn't seeing actually anything really practically done to address that. And then he started to be an activist in a civil society organization. And so I do think that really the ideal situation would be either more cooperation between civil societies, organization, and institution, or really capacity of Iraqi elite to really bring on board these young people who want to see a different type of decision making, a different type of way of operating within the institutional landscape. Thank you.
Yes, I completely agree with Maria, and it also corresponds a lot like to my personal impressions, like from conversations with Iraqi youth. Like there is so much activism going on right now. There have been a number of civil society youth-led organizations like currently doing hands-on reconstruction work in Mosul, for example, like making the streets again more beautiful, or returning a bit like the hope of local artisans, like in the area of the bazaar. So I just wanted to say, like when I was interviewing youth activists during the Tishrin protests, a lot of them were also quite aware of their lack of experience of policy work, or for example, like how certain political institutions function. So where also we touched a bit on this topic during our discussions is to encourage like programs also sponsored by decision makers in Iraq to have like more engagement with youth. You'd have ideas, like sometimes they would have a very refreshing view on agricultural reform, or they would have like some recommendations on reforming like the work of their municipal authorities in their areas. So I think like there is a lot of untapped potential there, and therefore some of the recommendations like really encourage Iraqi decision makers to think of more innovative ways, like to involve youth, for example, in the drafting or in the thinking about like certain laws or reforms or their implementation on the ground, which could then like help them develop confidence to get engaged in politics, because a lot of those who were protesting did not like really feel themselves like capable and confident enough like to enter the political game. First, because they didn't want like to get corrupted by the whole system, and secondly because they knew they don't really like have the know-how of how things function in the halls of power in Iraq. And I think like this is a window of opportunity that we now have.
Thank you very much. We are just about out of time. I would like to thank the panelists all, and I would like to thank also Ambassador Blackwell. And I would like to thank our partners, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and DT Institute, who from the beginning were with us, believed in the program until we reached this moment. For the Iraq initiative, I would like also to thank our founding sponsor, Crescent Petroleum, and Mr. Majid Jafar, who's been engaged with us all the time, and his feedback has been important for us. Please do read the report and let us know if there is anything you think we should work on it. It's a living document. We are happy to include more. And also this program is continuing for another phase, so that will benefit us a lot. We would like to thank the audience for the engaged questions and for being here. Wishing you all a blessed day and also health for you and your families. Thank you.